Well, you've been asking for it, and today you're finally going to get it. We're going to take a look in depth at the wing angle and position on the Wing 360 Sprint cars, and we're going to be taking a look at the effects it has on the car on both a big track and a small track. Coming up next. What's up, everybody? Thomas Brandon here. Thank you, as always, very much for joining me. And like I said, today we're going to be diving into the winged 360 Sprint cars and looking at the wing angle and wing position for both the small track and a big track. Now, ever since I put out the wing angle and position video for the 410 Sprint cars at Charlotte, I've had a ton of people asking me if I would do the same type of video for the 360s. Now, I decided to do that today, and instead of just looking at it in terms of a big track, I wanted to look at it on both a big track and a small track, which is what I did. Now, I broke the test down into a couple of different sections along with big track and small track, and I'm going to be covering that here in just a second. All right, but first, let's take a look at what we did for the setups for first the big track. Now, for the big track, we were at Volusia, and what I went with was 12.5 inches of stagger. We did 3 different wing angles. We did 24 degrees, 27 degrees, and 30 degrees, okay? And then I used the same setup on the Tacky, and then we did a 50% and then a 100% track. All right, now on the Tacky, we had this bar combination along with shock combination, pretty straightforward. We were running 5 gallons of fuel, so basically like it would be like a heat race or qualifying, and then we did a 5:49 gear ratio. Now the track state for the Tacky track was 10%, okay? Now when we went to the slick track, what we did is we did a 50% test, or a 50% track state, and then I tested each wing at 24, 27, and 30, but I did it at -2 for each one. So we moved it back 2 notches on a 50% track. Then we went to a 100% track. On the 100% track, the only thing that I changed was the wing position, and then I dropped the fuel. So I was trying to simulate, had you started a race, a feature at 50%, you burned off fuel, now the track's 100, and you've moved the wing back. Now, as I did this, there was a couple of things that I noticed, and we're going to take a look at the Motec here real quick. So as we look at this here in Motec, the first thing that you need to know is that I did the same testing method that I always do. I did 2 laps around the top and then 2 laps around the bottom. Now, when it was Tacky, we basically just followed the marbles, all right? Just followed the cushion, which was only about halfway up on a 10% track. Now, when we went to the bottom, it wasn't like we just ripped around the bottom. It was more of a slider line in turns 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, we would go in about the middle and try to come out a little bit lower. All right, so that was the line that we were running. Now, when we look at the numbers, the 2 laps around the top, the numbers are basically what I would expect to see on a half-mile track in the 360. As we increased the angle, the car slowed down. We were losing on average about a half a tenth. Now, keep in mind, there is a little, give and take with that. In terms of, me hitting the line exactly the same each and every time. I did not do that. I'm not a perfect driver, okay? And so even the slightest change in the line could have an effect. But on average, that's about what we were seeing. Now, when we look at the numbers, you can see here that we were averaging almost a full mile per hour more around the top when the wing was at 24 and forward than when it was at 27 and forward. Now, around the bottom, and we were running wide open around the bottom, it was pretty much the same thing, about 100 or about a 1 mile per hour difference in terms of our overall speed. Now, we did increase our downforce some, if we look at the downforce numbers here, but it was very minor and in only a couple of spots. The reason for this is because when we're wide open at a track like Volusia, the car, which the way that I measured downforce has to do with the dynamic ride heights. When the car is wide open like that, the car's basically sucked down and it's just staying there. Like I said, mechanically, it had the same setup on it. The only difference was that wing angle. So not a whole lot of difference in terms of what we saw downforce-wise with 24 to 27. Now, when we go from 24 to 30, though, Now we actually see in terms of our overall downforce. Now there was with the angle when we looked at the 24 and 27, there was a difference in terms of the rear dynamic weight load. We did increase our rear dynamic weight by, a pound or two on each wheel and decrease it off the front by a pound or two on each wheel, which would make sense if you increase the angle, right? You're going to have a little bit more downforce in the rear. Like I said, there was some there. You could see it. It was small, but it was still there. And like I said, it equated to about a pound or two per each rear wheel. Now, when we increase it to 30, around the top, we see a big drop off in speed. And this was to be expected, okay? And this is, we pretty much knew this going in. We would see about a 2 mile per hour difference in terms of overall speed dropped. This equated to like a tenth of a second, even a little bit more in certain spots. Okay, so it definitely slowed the car down. Now, when we look at the downforce, once again, downforce was increased, but it was, very, very minor. And because the car is already winged down, it's already sucked down, we're wide open. So we're not seeing much there. We did increase our dynamic weight to the rear, our dynamic tire load. We also increased it on the front though, or at least one tire on the front. So I've said this before in the previous wing video that I did. When you increase the angle, okay, it's not the increasing the angle is not the same as having it at 24 and moving it back. Increasing the angle centers the downforce on the car more. All right, so it applies more pressure on all four tires. Now we saw this on 3 out of the 4 with it at 30 degrees and forward. Like I said, when you're wide open like that, the difference is going to be minor in terms of what you see in pressure applied from downforce because the car is wide open. It's already sucked down. So the way I measure downforce, that's kind of the flaw in it, okay? But we did increase our dynamic wheel load by quite a bit. We increased it by 2 on the left rear, and then we increased it by 11 on the right rear. So quite a bit in terms of the dynamic load. When we went to the bottom, it was more of the same. With the wing at 30 and forward. We saw increased load on the rear. We saw increased load on the front, except the left front tire. A lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that we were putting so much more weight on the rear. It's got to come from somewhere. It came from the left front. So we actually took a couple pounds off the left front. This actually made the car, one thing that I noticed when I was running low, it actually made the car have a little bit of a push going around the bottom. It didn't just want to, steer down and keep it nice and straight. It actually kind of pushed and then wanted to snap a little bit. So even increasing, 6 degrees at a big track like Volusia, and Volusia is obviously a different shaped track, right? It's a D shape, so it's not symmetrical. That caused some definite handling differences in terms of how the car felt. The car felt planted, felt stuck to the track, but it was slow. It was very slow. It was, like I said, a couple tenths off of where we were. So tacky track, half mile, big tracks, keep that thing at 24, keep it forward. I mean, we knew this going in, right? And that is just confirming what we already suspected and already knew, basically. Now, the difference really comes 50% track. Now, when the wing was at 24 and -2 compared to 27 and -2, there was a slight difference around the top. It was small, but it was still there. Increasing that angle a little bit did cause us to get a little bit better grip. It also gave us a little bit more drag. Our handling was still very, very good at 24 and -2, that we were able to run wide open around the top in both with both wing setups, okay? Our overall speed was slightly better, not much. This equated to, I mean, the difference in times was a couple hundredths on average. Keep in mind, like I said before, we're looking at small sample sizes. Okay, so, over a 20 lap run, it might be different. But since the tracks in iRacing change so quickly, and we're going to be moving the wings back as that, slicks off so fast, to me, a 20 lap sample size probably not going to represent what you actually do in a race, but that's just me, okay? So, looking at this, with it at 27, we did see an increase in traction, like I said, very, very small, but that traction came at a cost. We were losing time, all right? We were definitely slower. Now, with it at 30 and 2, this was a decent drop off. Where the wing really, or where this really shined at 30 degrees and -2 was around the bottom. Around the top, we were just slow, okay? Just slow. Yes, the car felt planted. Yes, it, felt a little bit more stable than at 24 and -2, but the car was slow. It just did not carry the momentum around the top. And once again, we saw this with the Tacky. We would expect to see this on a 50% track, okay? But when we went to the bottom, we actually did see a little bit of an improvement. And what I mean by that is that now we were able to stick the bottom much better because we could just roll in and out of the throttle. The car would go right down to the bottom and stay down there nicely. We could roll right back into the throttle. We were much smoother, okay? That extra drag helped in terms of, the car slowing down on its own. When it was at 24, it would almost want to overshoot. You'd have to get out of the throttle a little bit earlier. So you could actually drive it in a little bit deeper. Not much, but a little bit deeper. So around the bottom, it started to show what that 30-degree angle would do, okay? Now, in terms of the data, it basically showed us what we were seeing before. It had increased our wheel load, right? It increased our traction. It slowed us down, okay? If we look at the dynamic tire load, once again, 30 and -2, it had increased the weight on the front by about 10 pounds. We also increased the weight on the rear by about 13 total. All right. So a pretty significant increase in terms of what we saw on the wheel loads. So that was 50%. Now, when we got to the 100% track, this is really where we saw the biggest difference. So around the top, and the track was pretty slick, there was still a cushion that you could run. You could still basically run wide open around the top. You might have to burp it here and there, but for the most part, you were wide open around the top. When we were looking at the 24 versus 27, and we had the wing at -6, 24 degrees was definitely faster. Okay, we were saving a tenth of a second. One thing that I noticed with the wing at 27 and -6 is that overall it just made the car really want to push. It didn't give us that four-wheel grip that we're looking for, even around the top. When we went to the bottom, it was really the same thing. We were not seeing the balance that I kind of had expected. We increased the rears, but we were just taking it off the front. And so the car, it just wasn't very comfortable. I was really surprised by that. Now, keep in mind, all right, note, I did go back and test 27 degrees on the big track at a different position, and that felt better. So I didn't get the data for that. I got it on the small track, and you'll see it here in a second. But it did feel better, and the times were better. Now, when we went to 30 degrees at -6, this was really where this thing shined, the increased angle. We were slower around the top. Our laps around the top were where we were about a tenth slower on average, yes, but we were a tenth to a tenth and a half faster on the bottom. So when it was at 30 and -6, we could roll right out the throttle. The car would get to the bottom, get down there, roll right back in, and we had good drive out of the corner. Even if I missed the line and was in the slick, which there wasn't much grip down on the bottom when it was 100%, the car was stable. It felt comfortable, and it drove really nice out of the corners. And once again, it's showing us with the data what we expected. So yeah, overall, 30 degrees at the bigger tracks, unless the track is going to be really, really slick, I would recommend using, 24 or 27 in the 360s. That's probably what I will do. And like I said, if there's situations where the track is going to be really slick and you think the line's going to be around the bottom, then it's worth looking at 30 degrees on the angle. Now, keep in mind, like I said before, and I've said this numerous times, driving style, all right, your setup, all of that stuff is going to play an effect on this. Okay, you could have a different setup on the car and find that different wing angles and different positions work better for you. Okay, so this is based on what I'm running. Do not see this as hard and fast, black and white. This is the way it is. Okay, always remember that when I'm doing this stuff. Now, the smaller tracks, this was surprising. Okay, now the track that I used was Limaland. Okay, and when we look at the laps here at Limaland, now on the smaller tracks, for the most part, a lot of times I would just run the wing at 30 degrees, even when it's tacky, just 30 degrees in forward. Now there are situations where I will play around with it some, because I used to have a basic rule where it was like, linear and smaller, 30 degrees, everything bigger, 24. Now I have tinkered with that some, like I said, and played around with it. Saw some gains and then also saw some loss. And so I'd always just kind of done 30, like I said. All right, there are situations where I've tried others, but for the most part, I've just done 30. And if I did do a less wing angle and forward, it would basically be for like qualifying, and by the heat race I had already moved it back. Okay, so stability on the smaller track, had always seemed to really help. Now, the setup that I used here at Limaland for this was a little bit different, and this might be one of the reasons why I saw some improvement. Also, keep in mind though, Limaland is a high banked quarter mile. Okay, so doing this at Fairbury is probably going to yield you a different result, for example. Okay, but Limaland's a high bank quarter mile. And so what I wanted to do is I had a little bit of a different setup that I tried than my typical base at Limaland. We went with the I just left it at 12.5 inches of stagger. And then we did 10 1/4 bars on the right with thousandths on the left. This is the shock packages that I ran. And then 17, 75, and 14 for the wheel spacing, 5 gallons of fuel, and a 596 gear. Okay, so that was what we did for our base setup. And then the only thing I changed was the wing angle. Looking at this, all right, around the top, we were actually a little bit faster with the wing at 24 around the top than with the wing at 27. This was kind of surprising. I didn't expect to see that. I thought that I shouldn't say that. I didn't really know what to expect, to be honest with you. Around the top, 24, it was faster. Now we were running wide open, okay. On this tacky track, it was a 10% track, so we were running wide open. And the 2 laps around the top, we were faster. We were just flat out faster. If we look at comparing the 27 and we go to the acceleration side here where we've got our downforce and stuff like that. Once again, we're seeing pretty similar, but not quite the same as we saw at Volusia. So at Limaland, smaller track, we are using some more wheel input, right? The car is moving around just a little bit more. It's got a little bit more action. The downforce numbers were definitely showing themselves a lot more on the small track, even though both of them were done wide open. We saw an increase in the downforce, basically overall on all 4 corners of the car from 24 to 27 degrees, even with it forward and around the top. Now, around the bottom, this is really where we saw the increased wing angle help. Around the bottom, the car it was just more stable. It had better grip. It could hold the line more. At 24, I noticed the car was wanting to slide out just a little bit more. At 27, it felt a little bit more planted, and we were faster around the bottom with the wing at 27 than with the wing at 24. So around the top, where it's really momentum, right? 24, it was faster. We put it at 27, though, around the bottom, and it was faster there. So, a little give and take. One of those things where if you're qualifying, might be worth a shot to try a different wing angle. Just saying. In a heat race, though, on a fresher track, this might be something to really think about. If you're thinking about just going to the top, it might be worth running your wing at 24 degrees, right? Because you might be a little bit faster. If you're going to be going and running that bottom line, though, you're gonna be really on the throttle, you might want to look at increasing that angle. But not to 27. You're going to want to increase it to 30 because 30 degrees around the bottom, this is really where it shined. Around the bottom, it was awesome at 30 degrees. The car was just stuck to the track. I mean, it was absolutely planted like you would expect it with the wing at 30 degrees. It had good drive out of the corner. It went where I wanted it to go. Even on a 10% track, which is a really tacky track, it felt really good. Now around the top, a little bit slower. We had some more downforce, obviously, but like I said, around the bottom, this is really where it was at. That is where we saw the 30-degree wing angle really shine. Around the bottom, the car was just stuck to the track. It was planted. We had better traction by 2%, which is a 2% increase in traction is a lot, okay, especially on a fresh track. That's a big jump in traction. We carried more speed. All right, we were about 2 miles per hour faster. Okay, so once again, the car it's got more grip. It's carrying more momentum. Even though it's got more drag, it's carrying more momentum. So 30 degrees all the way forward on a fresh track. If you're going to the bottom, right, if you're going to run the bottom at Limaland, definitely what you would want to do. Around the top, 24 was faster. Now, like I said before, keep in mind we're on a high banked quarter-mile track, okay? Will this be the same at a Kokomo or a Fairbury? I don't know. Probably, my guess would be no, okay? That would be my guess. But, once again, I haven't broken it down and tested it like this, okay? So, there might be, you might find that different tracks, different angles, all right? But it's just something to look at moving forward. It's not, like I said, so black and white the way that we thought for quite a while, or the way that I thought for quite a while, okay? Now, on the 50% track, all right, this is, once again, where we start to see some differences in the angles. So, 50% track, what I did was I ran the wing at -4. Okay, so we did 24, 27, and 30. Now we also had a different setup. All right. And so what I did was I took the stagger down to 12. I put a different shock package on there. This was pretty close to what I would run for a main event. All right, around what I would run for a main event, depending on how slick the track was. And then I also took the tilt out of the bar. So I increased the left front bar to 10 1/4, dropped the right rear down to 1,000, and then, reset ride heights and all that good stuff. Okay, so that's what we were running. Now, the data around the top with it at 24, we were a little bit slower. Okay, we were actually slower. Part of the reason why I think was we just weren't getting the grip. Okay, there was a slight difference between 24 and 27. 27, you could actually feel the car be a little bit more stable. It definitely felt better than 24. And so it showed around around the top. It also showed around the bottom. The car was just better around the bottom as well. It felt more glued to the track, which I kind of expected with the increased angle. We had more traction. We obviously had more downforce. And so the car just felt better at 27 and 4 than it did at 24 and 4. 24 and 4 at a 50% track just did not feel that good. Now keep in mind, a 50% track, the track still had quite a bit of grip left in it on the top and the bottom, especially around the bottom. Now 30 degrees though, this was the biggest improvement. So 30 degrees, we were much more consistent and much better. Now around the top, I will say this, around the top, we were a couple hundred slower than 27, but around the bottom, we were a tenth or 2/10 faster. Okay, so much faster around the bottom. The car was way more comfortable, way more stable, had much more grip, and just felt, it just overall felt good. Okay, really, really good. I could literally run the bottom and just use throttle. And I only used just the throttle for all three of these, but I mean, it was really nice and smooth. I could roll out, get the car rotated, get it set, and just roll back in, and the car just went. It was really, really nice. So yeah, 30 degrees, um, at -4 was definitely where it felt the best. Okay. Now, when we get to the 100% track, and what I did was what I did before at Volusia, but with a little bit of a twist. And so what I ended up doing on the 100% track was is I dropped the fuel like we did before at Volusia to emulate, running out of fuel like a long run. I didn't touch anything else but the position. So for the 24-degree setup, it was at 8. And I went out and I took the car, I set it at 24 and 4. I just took that one out, dropped the fuel, and took out the one from 50%, 24 and 4. And then I just moved the wing back until the car felt good, until it felt what I would want it to feel like if I was racing. At 24 and 8, that was where I found it, okay? And the car did not feel very good. All right, it just didn't. For 27, it was 7. And then for 30, it was 6. That's what I had done. So I went the, what feels good route this time instead of trying to compare just position to position. So at 24 and 8 versus 27 and 7, the 24 and 8 around the top was better. Okay. I mean, it just was actually a little bit faster around the top. 27 and 7 around the top actually didn't feel that good. And to be honest, it kind of felt like crap. But around the bottom, it was much better. 27 and 7 around the bottom was much better. We were, took a couple tenths of a second off our lap times. Now, once again, when we get to the 30 degree, this is really where we see the benefit of that increased angle. So 24 and 8 versus 30 degrees and 6. The 30 and 6 definitely felt the best. The downforce was much more balanced. At 24 and 8, it was a really fine line. So if I was at 24 and 7, the car wasn't getting the grip that I needed on the rear. At 24 and 8, I was getting the grip, but the car would actually want to push a little bit. And so I was having to really work the throttle to keep that car from wanting to push and then snap. At 30 and 6, it was just planted. The car felt great. I could just roll out the throttle, drive it into the corner, roll back in, and it just felt good like that. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it, but other than the fact that it was comfortable, it felt good. And we saw, once again, confirming this, we saw the increased downforce on all 4 wheels, right? We didn't just have it on like 2 or 3, it was all 4. When we look at the dynamic tire load, we increased our weight everywhere, and we did it on a much more even field, meaning that before when it's at 24 and we crank it back, we actually start to see the weight shift to one side over the other, where when it's at 30, it was much more even. So we saw a 10-pound difference between right and left at 30, where we saw a 13 or 14-pound difference where it was at 24 and 8, right? So when you've got the wing flatter, this is something that I've noticed before. When the wing is flatter, the more you pull it back, that weight that you're moving to the rear, it's not 1-to-1, okay? You might be increasing the right side more than the left side, all right? This is why I think when you trunk the wing, all right, at 24 degrees, it's why you get that snow plow and then snap, because you're increasing both rear tires, the weight to both rear tires, but you're increasing the right more, okay? So you're getting that push and then the car snapping on you. When it's at 30, it's much more balanced. You're keeping the car much more balanced. And like I said, you're applying it to all 4 tires as opposed to just the rears. So it was really, really eye-opening on a couple of things. A lot of it was pretty much what I had expected, but some of it was actually pretty eye-opening, particularly for the small tacky track and the big really slick track, right? So if you're on a half-mile track, even in a 360, if it's going to be super slick, look at putting the wing at 30, all right? I'm not saying you have to, okay, but don't rule it out. I mean, 30 degrees, and then, maybe you only have to move it to like -3 or -4, okay? And that might feel really good if the track is super slick. Keep in mind, though, it's really a trade-off, because if the track is not really slick, if it is, fairly tacky, if it's a 50%, even a 60% track, you're going to be slow. Now, is there a chance that that track might get to 100%, get beyond 100%, right? Get to its black ice state? Yes, there is, and it happens frequently. How many laps are going to be left for you to make a move? That's the thing, okay? If the track doesn't fall off the way that you think it does, you might be out there with the car that's going to be really good on a long run, but you never get to see it because the run's not long enough. So it's that trade-off we always talk about, that guessing game, right? Where you got to look at something, you got to say, what do I think is going to happen? And if it does happen, how am I going to attack it? And that's really all you're trying to do with the setups. You're just trying to find that balance to where you've got something good enough in the beginning to get you to the end where hopefully you'll get better, right? Like that's usually the mindset that I have. So that's the big tracks. On the small tracks, don't rule out running your wing at 24 degrees, okay, even 27 early on, and running it forwards. You might find that that feels good. Now, once that track starts to slick off, then 30 degrees seems to be where it's at. Increase that wing angle to 30 degrees and move it back accordingly. But that was definitely something that I was not expecting. I did not expect to see the car be that much better with the wing flat and forward on the smaller track. So that was pretty eye-opening. But anyways, that'll do it. Now, really quick before I go, do me a favor, please hit that like button, subscribe. All right, same things as always. Share it. You guys, we're almost to 3,000 subscribers. I really want to get to 3K. When we get to the goal this year is to get to 5K. All right, so if we can get to 3, we're obviously more than halfway already. But I want to get to 3K because when we get to 5, I'm gonna do a special giveaway and I'm gonna be doing a bunch of cool stuff. So that's the goal, is to get to 5K. All right, so please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Also, if you want to join me, I do live stream every Wednesday and Thursday on Twitch. Link down in the description below. You can come out when I run 360s, big blocks, midgets, non-wing sprints. All right, bunch of cool stuff. I do occasionally live stream other days, Tuesdays, sometimes Saturdays. It just really depends, but Wednesdays and Thursdays every week I don't miss. Okay, so if you want to join me for that, link down in the description below. Also, if you want to get my free SSR setups for all of the dirt tracks for the 360s and the 410s, join the School of Sim Racing Discord. It is by far the best online community that you're going to find in sim racing, period, at least in my opinion. All right, and I've heard this from others too, but I think it's by far the best. So if you want to join that and just join a group of a couple thousand people that are all in there helping each other, doing races together, and it's just a lot of fun, man. So if you want to check any of that stuff out, links for everything down in the description below. But that'll do it. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Until next time, I want to wish you good luck, good racing. Take care.